Thank you for joining our Secure Justice podcast. We're going to call this one today The Pros and Cons of Being a Visible Muslim. I have four very special guests today that I've worked with, some for a handful of years now. Um, each of these women obviously wears hijab and is a Muslim. And so we're going to talk about kind of the upside and downside to being so visibly identifiable. Our first guest is Maheen Ahmed, is a first-generation Pakistani American. She's the first Muslim legislative director in California state legislative history, working for our amazing champion, Assembly Member Rob Bonta. It's also a bit surprising and sad that it's taken California this long to get to this position. So kudos, Maheen, for being the first. Maheen has previously worked at CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is, I believe, the largest or one of the largest Muslim civil rights organizations in the country. And so thank you for being here and participating. Jehan Hakim is a first-generation Yemeni American. She chairs the Yemeni American Committee, formerly worked at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Asian Law Caucus, which is where I first met her. Thank you for being here. Humaira Yusufi is a first-generation Afghan American. She's the deputy director of PANA, which is the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans down in San Diego. Humaira has previously worked at the ACLU and CARE San Diego. And as our sole Southern California guest, we appreciate you joining your Northern California friends on here. Smina Usman is a first-generation Pakistani American. She's the Senior Government Relations Coordinator for the Council on American Islamic Relations in SF Bay Area. She's maybe about 70% of my undefeated legislative streak, so I'm only going to be asking her easy questions. And just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. So the pros and cons of being a visible Muslim. I kept hearing this term between 2017 and 2019. It feels like we had so many local and state projects that I was working with Samina almost every day. And I kept hearing this term, visible Muslim, which, you know, as a country white boy first kind of scared me, like, are there invisible Muslims? Like, what does this mean? And what it came about, it was the fact that wearing hijab makes you obviously identifiable as a Muslim, whereas a dark-skinned man, you know, with a beard, maybe he's Muslim, maybe he's not. And on the flip side, obviously we've seen a dramatic increase in hate crimes domestically and around the globe, a rise in white supremacy. And so, of course, women that wear hijab are obviously, you know, easy targets. So Samina, when you were using this term, as you were navigating the political arena, as you were doing your advocacy, I mean, why do you say this word? Why is it important for you to be seen?
No, I mean, I thought it's very important for Muslims to be seen in this type of arena, whether it be the political arena or whether it be media or in other capacities, because I think oftentimes, you know, people have this misconception about Islam and Muslims. You know, oftentimes people think that, you know, I need to be liberated from wearing a scarf and that this is an oppressive symbol. But in reality, for me, I actually view this as being very, you know, liberating, because again, I feel like by wearing a scarf, I am viewed as for myself rather than how I appear to be. But I also feel as though that because of all like the negative impressions about Islam and Muslims, and the fact that, you know, wearing a hijab, you are visible because, you know, it is known that you are a Muslim. Most people would not be able to, you know, think of me as being of a different background or a different religion or whatnot. I mean, I think it's fairly clear that I am a Muslim. And so in a sense, you're basically like a walking billboard for Islam. You are the walking representation of Islam and Muslims. So while I feel like it is liberating in many ways, it's a lot of pressure, because whatever I do is going to be a reflection of 1.8 billion Muslims, or at least that's what I put upon myself. That's the pressure I put upon myself. And I feel like, okay, well, you know, I got to make sure I don't, you know, act poorly, or I don't speed, although I do speed, So I have to make sure that definitely don't litter. Oh, that would be terrible, because if anybody sees me doing these type of things, I feel like it's going to be like a reflective of all the 1.8 billion Muslims. And I know it's a lot of pressure that I am imposing on myself, and I'm actually imposing on my children, because if my children are misbehaving and people see me with them, I can only imagine what goes through people's minds and saying, oh yeah, like it's because, oh yeah, these Muslims don't know how to raise their children. And it's sad that I know I shouldn't be putting that pressure on my children, but at the same time, I know the implications of what it could be if people see me or see my children acting in a certain way that isn't very Islamic. And so I feel like, there's a lot of benefits if people see Muslims that are involved, in protests, in different venues. It does make an impact. So I'll give you an example. When I attended there was a vigil that was after the Pulse nightclub shooting. I think it was like the worst shooting that occurred in America, and it was against those who are LGBTQ at an LGBTQ nightclub, and that was conducted by somebody who was, or committed by somebody who was, appeared to be Muslim or had Muslim roots. And when people saw me at this huge vigil that was taking place at the Castro, you don't even know how many people were thanking me for attending that, and were thanking me for being there, and the impact that it made for them to see a visible Muslim in that crowd. If I had just worn like a hat or a beanie or whatever, it wouldn't have made a difference. But the fact that I showed up in a scarf, in a visible scarf, it made an impact on people, and they appreciated us being there. And I felt like it helped to build bridges, and it helped to bridge that divide that could have taken place. Although honestly, the LGBTQ community have been very supportive. I couldn't believe how many people had signs that said no to Islamophobia at this rally, at this vigil. But again, I think it made it even bigger impact, the fact that I was there with a scarf, as opposed to if I was wearing a beanie or wasn't wearing a scarf at all.
That deserves a mashallah, targeted communities standing in solidarity with each other is obviously important in the work that we all do. Maheen, you've got this very prominent position, obviously comes with a lot of public visibility. Do you have other people to hang out with? I mean, are you the only person when you're walking down the halls in Sacramento and talking to the other legislatures that looks like you and identifies with you? Do you have a support network? How has that been? Do you feel isolated in Sacramento?
No, that's a good question. I think it's definitely been a journey. I've been here for almost 5 years now, and I can say throughout this entire time, I've been the only staffer that wears a hijab in the Capitol, whether it's like, legislative director or, a legislator. We know we don't have any Muslim legislators, but even like staff, there have been a couple interns that have come through, but even those, it's come through those of us from the Muslim community who are doing that outreach as well, to get them in the door. So the few that I've seen, I'm like, yeah, I've been pulling them in to make sure that they come to the Capitol. But I do remember when I started at the Capitol, when I was a fellow, during the Assembly Fellowship, this was, I think, a couple weeks right before Trump was elected. And so I remember starting and knowing that I was going to be the only visible Muslim. I thought I was going to be one of the only handful of Muslims, which is also the case. And just feeling very, very, very uncomfortable and wondering what I was doing here, leaving CARE, which is going to be on the front lines in the Trump administration against these attacks on our community, and now coming into the space in the Capitol, where California is a lot more progressive than federal, but at the same time, it is a place of power where we know that people of color, people that look like me, haven't really belonged. And so it definitely was a struggle, and I found the most allyship, honestly, with those who are from other communities of color, especially the Black community. My mentors, like that first year, I remember grabbing coffee with them a couple of times and just crying and being like, how do you even survive in a space like this where no one overtly has said anything to me? No one has said said anything Islamophobic or like, you know, it's rude, like up front. I think they knew that if they said anything to me, it would go to my assembly member, and they didn't want to ruin relationships that way. But at the same time, it's not like it was very welcoming as either, unless it was people of color that understood what it meant to be a Muslim, what it meant to be a minority in this space of power, where we get to dictate the laws that Californians have to follow. And so definitely found a lot of comfort with Black mentors, Black female mentors in the beginning. And I've been trying to cultivate that space moving forward for Muslims as well. So it's a challenge, you know, but one that I'm grateful to have the support that I have gotten. So I was born in Los Angeles.
You were there West Coast as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. And so you had at least some folks growing up to hang out with in Los Angeles, that would matter. Some other Muslims that you could, I don't know, whether going to school with, be friends with.
Yeah, and I mean, I even went to like an Islamic school in elementary school, so it definitely came from a space that was like very Muslim. Then I went to a Catholic high school, so that completely flipped on its head, where I was the only Muslim again. So I got used to that fact, which made it, I think, a little easier to be in the capital space. But yeah, you have to have a very strong community, I think, of your own if you want to be in these spaces. You need that support.
Yeah, maybe you just like standing out. I don't know, being unique.
I don't know how I get myself in these situations.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being terrible, how terrible do you feel that by working with you, a certain white boy got placed on an FBI watch list?
How terrible do I feel?
You're supposed to say you feel terrible. Okay.
Oh,
So you don't feel terrible at all. Okay.
That you're on an FBI.
All right. I see how it is.
I feel like I'm trying to understand what the question is.
Okay. Because my associations with you people have led to a lot of great successes and a lot of drama.
I will say, I mean, you know, I think those of us that are on this, you know, recording right now, like, I think we are also on a lot of different
a lot of watch lists. Yeah, I know.
Of our own. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Jehan, you've got 2 daughters that are of age that are wearing hijab. I believe they go to Islamic school. You have told me in the past, you grew up in some colorful places in San Francisco, you know, the Tenderloin, the Mission District. So similar to the questions that I was asking Maheen, did you have anybody to identify with? Like, how was that growing up?
Well, I think maybe the oldest in this bunch. So I'm an 80s kid from amongst the women, I think. So, I mean, I wasn't a visible Muslim woman growing up. I didn't start covering until I was after high school. And that was like right before 9/11. So, you know, it was, you know, I've always lived, so the Tenderloin is home to a lot of Muslims, and especially Arab Muslims. So that's really home to me. And we all, you know, community is community. So I didn't really have to deal with Islamophobia growing up until really 9/11. Yeah, and then my daughters, they wear the hijab, and they've been wearing it since they were preteens. And for those listening, a disclaimer, my girls wearing hijab and practicing Islam, praying 5 times a day, has been an individual choice. And, you know, it's, I moved to Fremont for the safety, to get away from a lot of the hustle and bustle of not just the city, but also kind of the dynamics that comes with it. You know, I try to drive them everywhere in order to reduce their commute on public transit in order for them to be safer. You know, safety classes or self-defense classes in order to get them ready. And I did have the talk with them, the talk of like how to be safe as a visible Muslim girl. So yeah, it's kind of like something that you got to do to keep yourself safe, just like a lot of other communities that are impacted by some of these systemic policies. It's, you know, Black communities can't change the color of their skin. So that's a different conversation, you know, so it's kind of a territory.
And so for folks that don't know Alameda County so well, when you said you moved to Fremont for safety due to the larger Muslim population or immigrant population, you feel
Yeah,
safer
that's right.
there in that part of the county.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. And my kids also went to an Islamic school. So now they're in college, they're no longer high schoolers, but yeah, they went to an Islamic school in Fremont, and it's safer.
So you and I first worked together in 2017. I think I met you and Samina about the same time. You guys were advocating for the ordinance like San Francisco had to regulate participation in a joint terrorism task force. I've been pretty blessed. I've had, made a million friends in the Bay Area, and my Muslim friends are the only ones that even use the word infiltrator. And obviously, as you just mentioned since 9/11, the U.S. has been like hyper focused on surveilling Muslims. And how difficult is it for you? Because I know you've done a lot of organizing work. How do you get community members to come out with you and advocate or dissent against the very government that is targeting them? Do you have magic talking points? How do you solve this?
There aren't magic talking points. It's really a mental shift for some, especially Arabs and Yemenis specifically, to turn out to vote, to know their rights, to protest, to be vocal on issues, and understand that they have a role in the society and can create real change if they get involved in politics. But like you said, like the MENA, or the Middle East and North Africa, historically has not been the most tolerable to dissent. And on the other hand, US foreign policy via the war on terror, via endless wars, also has not helped folks from Muslim majority countries, feel safe. And I think they have every right to feel afraid and not trust the government. So, it's a struggle. Well, I mean, I think what I kind of remind myself and remind my community is I attempt to frame this, like, get involved in policy through a lens of like, how did those who fought before us, the indigenous peoples movement, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, and so many of those who sacrificed their lives and their safety and their property and all their resources in order to, you know, um, have a little bit of political power, have a little bit of a say, have a little bit of security. So I think that's what I like to remind my community, and to just kind of, I mean, we live here, right? We live here, and we have to kind of, in order to create some kind of change, we have to be involved. So I think I can't recall who it was, but I want to say it's some scholar from back in the day says, even if you're not involved in politics, politics is involved in you. So when it comes to how many immunizations that our kids have to take in order to go into school, or where the stop sign is at, or if you're going to be banned, all of that requires some kind of political involvement. So I think we're at a great moment now. I mean, it's only upwards from here on, and it's way different from the way it was growing up.
So something Samina said earlier kind of triggered, she said she was talking about, putting all this pressure on herself. I want to talk about your guys' names first off. Noor Jahan, light of this world. Like, you guys have, like, I don't, and this is just a purely ignorant question. You guys have these very epic names. You put like, there's like all this pressure, it's like Maheen, I believe is the moon, or it's like a celestial body.
Yeah.
Samina is the most valuable one, which is like, okay, kind of matches your ego these days. But like, what what if you're number two? Like, do your parents not love you, like, because you're number two? Like, and
I'm out
my
of that way.
and my theory, Homaira was kind of throwing me off my theory. I looked at her name and I'm like, wait, is it like reddish or red?
My name means to blush.
Okay, yeah, but then I was reading, the prophet named one of his companions Homaira, and I'm like, that's where the pressure is. Now you just have to bring Islam to the other 4 billion people in the world. So how's that working out? No pressure there. I definitely know how Humaira feels about me being put on a watch list, because she told me in writing, if you can't read encrypted text messages out loud, I don't even know why we do this, but I was talking to her after this JTTF vote, And the short story is basically she wanted to use me as a human shield to defend her, which was I guess a not great arrangement for me. But let's talk about San Diego. The politics are so different. The anti-immigrant hysteria is stunning to me. And so when your parents first came over from Afghanistan, was it straight to San Diego?
Yeah. Well, we were living in Pakistan and then we came to San Diego because we had family here.
Okay. And public schools, Islamic school?
Public school all the way.
Okay. And did you have folks to identify with or hang out with?
I mean, my family, for one reason or another, always lived in those areas of San Diego that were really conservative. So no.
Which less in the Bay Area is all of them, but I mean, I guess some are more conservative than others.
San Diego is one of those interesting areas. I mean, you have areas that are super, super conservative, and then you have areas that are really, really progressive. So it really depends on where you live in the county. We're a really large county here. And so, I definitely had that experience of growing up and being like, me and my sister were like the only Muslims in our school, or maybe had one other Muslim, and so, yeah, I mean, I feel like, San Diego is like a big town, but really small town mentality. So growing up, I didn't wear hijab. I mean, I came to America literally not knowing one word of English and was put into kindergarten a week later. So that was my experience. And then I was disabled and had all of those experiences growing up and missing, tons and tons of school, being from a low income family, and so I think my personal experiences really shaped a lot of who I am today. And as Samina was talking, I didn't wear hijab until I was actually in college. It was the week before my 20th birthday that I started to wear hijab. And I was involved at school. And so they interviewed me and they asked me so why did you choose to wear hijab? And I said, well, I wanted to wear it a long time ago, but I felt so much pressure on my shoulders of how am I going to represent so many, the whole community, especially being someone who, really grew up post September 11th, right? And it took a lot for me to feel like I knew myself and I felt comfortable with myself enough to be able to wear the hijab and what that meant. And I think since then, it's been, a lot of what I talk about now is we're not a monolithic community. Why do we put that shoulders on, that weight on our shoulders, right? As Muslim women, man, don't we have enough to deal with that? Then we're also we got to be perfect. That's just not who anyone is. And I have 2 little kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they're, wonderful girls, but far from perfect in behavior. And to me, it's always exactly what Samina is saying. It's this fight within myself to be it's okay. And then another part of me is oh my God, what are people gonna think of me? And that fight in terms of you guys can probably hear them screaming in the background. So
perfect timing.
It's a good scream. They're having fun, right?
Yeah. Those are happy screams.
Otherwise, I'd be running out. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I definitely have been enjoying listening to our shared experiences and thought processes too.
And how is it for you, in a less progressive political climate, getting Muslims and other immigrants, because PANA does a lot more, right, to go talk to a government that might be targeting them? How do San Diego folks react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fear. There isn't this coalesce kind of community. I lived in the Bay Area for 2 years and I was oh my God, this is another world. People saying salam alaikum to me, smiling at me, and I walked across the street. I was what is this? Voila, first time in my life I'd experienced that, right? Samina knows because she grew up in San Diego. That's not what you get here. You get the crazy looks, the stares, certain areas of San Diego you don't go to, right? All of that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it's a huge challenge for us. I think, you know, for PANA, we work with newly arriving refugees a lot as well. And so while folks are feeling this sense of like, you know, I'm trying to rebuild my life, to try to then get them to engage in policies that like directly impact their communities is a huge challenge. I think a lot of what Jehan was talking about is exactly like what, you know, strategies we're trying to use down here as well. You know, and I think that it's really about building community for us. We can't organize unless we build that community, unless we build that sense of trust with each other, and with communities that are like-minded to us. And so that's, you know, that's our goal. It's not without its challenges, but we've also seen like the fruits of that work, you know, like the surveillance work that we've been doing, the fact that so much of that was led by, you know, myself, an Iranian woman, a Black man, you know, all of us are like communities of color really coming together to push these things forward and changing it up. You know, we're not your people that, you know, when we show up to city council, even virtually, I have to say, you know, when you got the people calling in different languages and the city's like trying to figure out how do we do this?
They had a hard time pronouncing names, definitely.
Right? It's not business as usual. And I think that's beautiful. That's how we create change, you know?
The San Diego, the surveillance ordinance vote, when you guys rallied all that public comment out, that was an ethnic rainbow. That was, you know, my white ears are just like, wow. It was just like, and you had a lot of bodies. I mean, there's a lot of people, you know. Yeah, you did really good.
Props to you all.
Thank you.
You know, so Samina, in our background research, and you know, we're keeping our watch list theme alive. You know, I know that your parents were small business owners, and I guess being in San Diego, maybe you saw a business opportunity to maybe, you know, work for some nefarious characters of the cartel. Tell us about the Muslim Girl Mafia. What is this about? Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, we jokingly called ourselves the Muslim Girl Mafia. Muslim Girl Mafia.
You have a gang sign. Do that again?
Yes, we have a little gang sign, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was pathetic. It's pathetic. No, I think it was just jokingly.
And you just went out and robbed people?
Like, again, like growing up, I mean, there were no Muslims. I mean, I you know, yeah, I think I was one of the few minorities in my school. And then I think in middle school, then like some Muslims came, and then I think in high school, you know, I was actually surprised that there was a number of Muslims that ended up coming. I think it's because they didn't live in the area, but I think there was like a busing kind of system in order to bring more minorities to come to this, you know, primarily white school. And so, yeah, and it was kind of interesting because I didn't wear hijab until college. And so I was kind of like of the mind, like, okay, I'm going to be friendly with them, but then I'm going to, you know, I kind of wanted to blend in. I didn't want to like be, and I felt terrible. I mean, now as an adult, I feel terrible, but like, yeah, I just felt like I didn't want to be associated with them. But then I think something changed in my last year in high school. And then, you know, I started to discover more of my Muslim roots, and I, you know, started hanging out with more of them. And so I think when we did hang out, then yeah, we jokingly called ourselves the Muslim Girl Mafia. So
it was a small gang, just a few people.
Small gang, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, it was good.
So I'd like to hear from Samina's organizing perspective and Maheen's legislative perspective. You guys have both been at CARE. I know there's a Muslim Day at the Capitol coming up. A very big event, very visible. You know, I've seen the bus loads. You guys swarm the Capitol. You know, let's, Maheen, start with you on your end, and speaking with your legislative hat on, not as your former stop at CARE. Are these events well received? Is the Muslim voting bloc increasing in power? Do you hear any negative, you know, you see any, you know, weird little side-eye action when all these Muslims show up in Sacramento?
Yeah, no, good questions. I think Muslim Day at the Capitol is something that's a very, I think, personal history with me. It was how I first made the decision of actually stepping foot into the Capitol and learning the ins and outs. So I staffed, when I was at CARE for 1 year, I actually was the coordinator for this day. So putting that aside for a second, I think definitely it is an experience that I think is intertwined with what I see now at the Capitol with lobbying days as well, because in the Capitol, you have tons of organizations that come pre-COVID to, talk to you about their communities, share with you their struggles. A lot of groups that are, just interest groups as well, such as like, the doctors or the nurses, and like just the most random groups that you never thought would ever lobby are here all the time. And I think each and every one of them has a story to share, right? Because these are communities that our laws impact. And so for the Muslim community, same thing, one day of bringing folks who have never been involved in the political world to actually get involved and share their stories. And this is the one opportunity, I think, unfortunately, one opportunity, right? Because I think the next thing I want to say is, I wish there was more than just one day. But in that one day that you have folks who come and they want to talk about what's happening in their lives and why they want their member, their representative, to vote a certain way on a bill or not to vote, yes or no. And I think from my lens as a staffer, definitely is great to hear from our communities. I know it's the one day on my end where I just love to just stand and walk around the halls of the Capitol, seeing my community, because I don't see them every day in the building. This is when I'm kind of like, yes, this is my day at the Capitol. This is Muslim, this is every day for me. Muslim Day at the Capitol is every day for me, but the one day that everybody else comes. But the thing that I think is important to recognize is that the most influence happens in being at the ear of the member more frequently than just one day. So that means understanding the process. Where in the legislative cycle is it impactful to actually have your community's voice heard? And not just that, how do you build up organizations, CARE or otherwise, that actually have the power to have the influence in members? Because I think CARE is known and reputable, but at the same time, are they at the Capitol all the time? Or do they have those relationships with the members that are necessary? And then grassroots organizing wise, people power, but then also influence in other ways as well. Like, are you involved in, for example, the campaign side of things? I think that's very important to this whole political world. So does it make an impact? I think it does. But can it be more impactful? Most definitely, if we are more involved in the political process.
Do you share that, Samina, those thoughts? And I know, because you bring community members out to all the local lobbying efforts we do, are people receptive? Do you got to twist arms a lot to get them to attend these events?
So, I think that there's two things that you're asking. In terms of bringing people to meet with their elected officials, I think it's, I think that you do have a lot of people who are interested, but just don't know how to get involved. And so we kind of help them with providing training, with providing the fact sheets, with providing talking points, and transportation, to get there. I think all people have to pay is $25 or $35 in order to attend. But of course, that's with transportation, food, training, all that other stuff. But to have over 700 people attend, I think it's an incredible sight to see so many Muslims who are part of this process, who want to be involved and want to make a difference in their state. So yeah, but I think that there is that bit of hesitancy, about how to go about doing so. And then also it's a whole day, in order to go. Now that we're doing it virtually, at least it's it's just providing people just have to take off an hour, maybe 2 hours tops. But when we were there physically, it's a whole day. But even then, to have 700 people attend and want to take part, I think it's incredible. Now, in terms of how did it get received by elected? So, I think I'm blessed to have my area is the Bay Area, so it's easier for me to be able to get those meetings with the elected officials. So I've always had 100% rate, in terms of, getting all of my meetings with my electeds. I know other chapters have trouble. Maybe it's also bandwidth, maybe it's because, also their conservative areas, and then also, I mean, sorry, I was going to say maybe it's because they're not awesome like me, but no, but it's also because like I have developed those relationships for years. Like I've been there for 15 years with CARE. And I think that that makes a difference for them to be seeing me every single year. I mean, I don't just show up like on Muslim Day at the Capitol and be like, hi, I'm here. No, I actually developed that relationship with them. And over these years, by being persistent when it comes to either legislation or seeing them at events or seeing them, so I think that them seeing me regularly, I've developed that kind of, the relationship, and also, like I'm like the legitimacy as well. So I think that makes a difference. But again, it's I think that electeds are often a little surprised by the bills that we choose, because when they see people who are visible Muslims showing up to the Capitol and they're talking about like police reform, or they're talking about issues like, to help those who are undocumented, I mean, or about, privacy rights or whatnot, it's surprising because they might have this perception that, oh, Muslims only care about Muslimi issues. And it's like, well, I mean, I think all these civil rights issues are Muslim issues, because, to be a Muslim is to be somebody who is going to stand firm for civil rights, who's going to stand for justice. And so this is why, I mean, honestly, this is why I do what I do, is because I want to serve God through serving his creation. And so this is what fuels me. This is what's kept me here in this organization, because I feel like it's one of the few organizations that I can really play this type of a role and have this type of an impact. And so, but yeah, I think it's received, differently by different offices, because there's some offices that I meet with more than others. Like, if they're in kind of like Solano County or, Napa County or those type of areas, it's a little bit, we don't have as much of a relationship because I don't meet with them as often. But
right.
So
I think that's case in point right there, right? Because if we have more communication, if we have more relationships that are being built with elected officials, you are in a way building more power, and there's power in those relationships, right? And so it's a strategic move to make sure that, you're the one who, if they need to go to someone, they know it's Samina. And I think that is needed for Muslims across the state, across the nation, in any sort of political organizing that we do. It is about building those relationships, and then, that way it goes both ways. They can reach out to you, you can reach out to them, and that comes through time and effort, and I think investment that organizations need to put into their legislative and government relations work, which unfortunately I think we still have a long ways to go with the Muslim community.
So, Jehan, when you see like Ilhan Omar, and I think, was it just yesterday, Samira Vasili was in the White House, the press briefing. Are you more encouraged that women that wear hijab, and just Muslims in general, are reaching the halls of power? Or, and because I've kind of heard a couple comments, in our circles, like, is there also, though, this sort of co-opting, like, oh, now it's kind of trendy, I'm gonna have a Muslim in my photo? Is it a mixture of the two? And maybe even if you are being co-opted, is there a silver lining that, well, we're at least a respectable voting power now and people are taking us serious? Is there, on balance, is it a positive or a negative when you see people getting, prominence and the visibility that comes with that?
I think representation is necessary for all of us, young and old, to feel a sense of pride in who we are and our identities, which are oftentimes influenced by cultural, societal, and political trends. So I definitely think it's a positive, because the lack of representation in film and media and all of that have portrayed us on the big screen as being inherently violent people. So representation definitely matters. Seeing Sister Ilhan and Samira will heavily impact how Muslims, especially Muslim girls and women, see themselves. Like my daughters, I mean, they look at them and they're like, that's amazing. They're proud. We're all proud. And I know that it's been a really long fight against racism and Islamophobia to get where they're at. And it's also a wake-up call for Islamophobes who only know Islam through the lens of Fox News to realize that Muslims are very much a huge segment of the society. They have political power, respect them, and see us. So I think it's a positive. Co-opting, that happens all the time. I mean, how many of our pictures have been on grant reports and all that stuff? I mean, I think I'm the token Yemeni American Muslim when it comes to foreign policy. They're looking for somebody, they Google, and then they find me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it helps the cause, to be represented, to be seen, like to be at the table. But I think for allies who really want to like join the movement and amplify the work all of us are doing, that they gotta do it in a meaningful way. You know what I mean? I think folks, their time has to be valued, has to be paid. I think instead of adding this kind of category to the work that is already existing, like fund organizations that are led by Muslims, and invest in Muslim communities that are already doing the work, as opposed to co-opting them or kind of inviting them for a webinar or to speak. I mean, I definitely, we use each other in politicking, right? This is just, politics is transactional. I hate to say it, but it's real, and it's the ugly side of politics. But it's definitely not fun, especially for communities that have been, you know, harmfully targeted by national security and foreign policies for over 2 decades now. So yeah, sorry, long-winded answer.
That was right on point. So, Myra, you and I, we collaborate on a lot of like state and local legislative projects. I personally favor like the inside game, writing laws, writing policies, but can we legislate our way away from Islamophobia, from hate attacks, or do we need a broader strategy? And if we need a broader strategy, do you know what that looks like? Easy questions. These are easy
I
questions.
know. Can we solve all the world problems?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I think legislation is part of it. I think that for far too long, Muslims have not been able to dictate, what our lives look like, what are the policies that affect us. And I think, for some of us who've been doing this work for a decade or longer, like we remember being the only ones even within coalition spaces, right? I mean, I'm so excited now when I see not only more Muslims, but like more folks talking about Islamophobia and issues like that, in these spaces. And so I think that, we are just at the beginning of that. I think, your question of like, is that the end all, if, be all of it? No, I think for us, we need to talk about what does community building and what does, I don't know. I feel like what does that look like for us, and what does community safety look like for us long term? Trump was a really good rude awakening to so many of us who are doing that work, that like, hey, like we've made some gains, but there's a lot more we need to do, and so yeah, I mean, I think that without, like, policy is great, but without like that really base level, like community organizing and community building, like we're not going to get super far, and we're not going to be able to have like sustained wins long term.
Thanks.
Maybe
Great.
if I can veggie back before I head off instead of piggyback. I agree with Humaira. I think Islamophobia is systemic, right? So whether it's NCERS, the drone warfare program, the war on Yemen, FBI harassment, the Muslim ban, legislation is necessary to peel back all of these policies that have legalized Islamophobia under the guise of, national security. And it also require a broader strategy, which I think we're all really struggling with, under-resourced, very little capacity to build and to turn out Muslims to vote, to support Muslim candidates, to increase Muslim representation. And like I said earlier, organizations and corporations have to really give back and invest and implement, countering Islamophobia with the DIE framework that's being integrated right now in all different, specters of the working world. So I think It's going to take all of it, but definitely policies have to be peeled back. That's for sure, because our people are hurting. And I think when they stop being victimized, I think there'll be more hope for them to kind of join, and with all of this community and political engagement.
Great. I want to thank all four of you. I know we've reached our time. Jehan, Samina, Maheen, Humaira, really appreciate you guys sharing your individual perspectives and just giving us some insight into what it's like to be a visible Muslim. Really appreciate that. And thank you for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Brian.
Cool.